I'm going to walk through the final steps in APT to get you to submit a feasible and schedulable JWST proposal. We have our M51, we have our exoplanet targets. We also have the observation folders down here for those two targets. You'll see that we still have some outstanding warnings on this. If I click on the errors and warnings, you can see that they are related to that visit planner tool or smart accounting not being run, which we'll be doing shortly. On the supernova, the generic target that was created, it's not being used, and so that gives a warning as well. Okay, the first tool that I'm going to start with is this timeline. And I'm going to just kind of show you a few features of it so that you can understand what it does. Basically, it takes the information that you have at the observation and visit level, exposures, etc., and displays it in a graphical model. So that's a little easier for you to visualize how this would lay out on the telescope. The scale defaults to seconds. You can change that to minutes if you like. You can zoom in. You can zoom back out. It starts with the defaults to very little labeling, what we call less detail. You can add more detail, more labels as you see fit. If you are at any lower level, you can actually see the same information by hovering over it, and it will show you kind of the breakdown. For instance, on the exposure, you can see that SAM, you can see the exposure setup, you can see other overheads, and the imaging time. It's really a personal choice how you like to see it, whether you like labels or whether you like to see more in a cleaner presentation, as it were. You can also see, especially as we've zoomed in, this is also represented. Each telescope activity has a slightly different color associated with it. The guide star acquisition here is in red. This olive color is the visit slew. If you want to see the full timeline key, you can click on this to that context-sensitive help that we've been talking about, and it will give you more details about the timeline in general. But then also down at the bottom here, you'll see that key as to what each color represents. Going back into APT, I was also going to show you what this looks like at sort of a broader scale. You can show this. This is showing one visit. You can show it at the visit, you can show it at the observation, and you can show it as the entire program. You can see now I need to zoom back out a little bit because some of these M51 observations are much larger. Just zoom until you can either read it or until you see everything you want to see. In this case, I think I can also shorten it up by putting less detail. And now you can see all 5 visits in there. If I add more detail, you can see it gets a little daunting. Again, personal choice as to what works best for how you're looking at it and which level. The other thing I want to point out here is this is that 2100 second slew that Beth mentioned. It's charged to each observation, but it's actually each target. These visits down here, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4, they're revisiting the same target. So that's why they have a smaller visit slew attached to them. But then you have that long visit slew down here on observation 2 because you're looking at a completely different target. This provides a little bit of a sanity check for you to look at this and make sure that you're seeing kind of that visual representation of what you would expect, the number of exposures, the relative length of them, making sure everything looks correct. If you were expecting to see something like we see here in visit 1 or in visit 2, but you saw something more like what you're seeing down here, you would know that maybe you didn't specify the exposure correctly, and you could go back into your form editor and make any changes that you needed, whether it was the number of dithers, whether it was a filter or exposure length or mosaic properties, whatever you feel needs to be done to make it look the way you intended. Let's move on to the visit planner. I will say the visit planner is sort of the workhorse of APT for JWST. It's going to tell you a lot about the feasibility and schedulability of your program. When you open the visit planner, it will show you the entities that you have highlighted here. If you have the visit, it will show the one visit. If you have an observation or an observation folder, it will show just that. The one exception is if you pick a linked visit, it will show you all visits that are linked to it. So that's why we don't see any difference whether I pick visit 1, 2, whether I pick the observation. It also has the same number of visits. These are all linked together. You may recall from those implicit requirements that Beth showed. You can see the entire program by clicking on the main observations folder up here. You can see we have our observation 1, our observation 2. If I open them up, you're seeing the individual visits. This is what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start by just processing this. This little yellow warning here was saying we didn't have the visit planner run, and then we have it spelled out. Schedulability has not yet been computed. Once we have run it through once, this will no longer appear for each visit. So the update display button down here in the lower left is active and in red, which means that things are out of date. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and you see the progress meter pops up. The visit planner can run long, especially if you've got a lot of observations, complex observations, or things like moving targets. It is also a shared resource, which means that other users are going to be using the same resources you are, and it starts to back up as you get closer to the deadline. We do recommend you get started earlier rather than later so that you have a little more time to allow for these longer visit planner runs. All right, so the results have come back, and you can see we've got a lovely green check mark down here on observation 2. That means that our observation is schedulable. This yellow warning says that it's out of date, but what it really means is it's unschedulable, and that's backed up by these red X's over here. That is just reinforcing you can't submit this. This has an error. The proposal level is saying the same thing. There's an unschedulable in the program, and it needs to be addressed. We'll see these red errors disappear as we work on observation 1. But we'll get to that soon. Let's take a look at observation 2 since that one actually worked. So you open up the observation, you can see if there were multiple visits, they would appear here. In this case, it's just the one visit. We can open it up to see the detailed parameters that contribute to the scheduling of this particular. Oh, that's not the right one to move. Yeah. There we go. All right, I'm just going to stretch this out so that we can see a little more information here on what each parameter is that we're looking at. So these parameters that are listed here are the ones that contribute to the overall scheduling. This top line means that the parameters below all have suitability at those particular times. The exception to that is this top line called the meteoroid safe zone. It is a preference rather than a requirement, and that's why you can still see some suitability even when it is not available at that particular time frame. I'll refer to it a little bit later, but for now, just know that it's a preference. The default constraints, that's constraints that are based on your target specification. They're not anything you have any control over. It's what APT calculates. And that would be the field of regard and the GuideStar availability. You can see here they've got some nice solid suitability to them. If you want more details about what they each represent, we have that context sensitive help again that will take you over here and give you more details about how these are each calculated. This field of regard is especially interesting, and if you want to get a few more details about how that is calculated for your target on JWST, there's a hot link here that will take you to a nice diagram and way more details as to how that's calculated. You also see the GuideStar availability listed, and then you see these other three, which are not included for visit 2, but do show up from time to time if they have a different impact. And that's earth avoidance, moon avoidance, and execution. In this case, if the earth or moon avoidance is the same as the field of regard, it just defaults to the field of regard. And that's what's happening in this particular case. So that covers these lines that you have no control over. But then we also have that phase. That's the special requirement that Beth put on to keep this happening every 24-ish days. And get that exoplanet during the part of the phase that we want. And you can see that that really is what is dominating the suitability for this particular target. You have good field regard, good GuideStar availability, but that phase is really there. The only way to increase your suitability or scheduling windows would be to either allow for a shorter period, which doesn't make sense for an exoplanet, or to expand each one of those phases to give us a little more flexibility every 24 days. We have these combined parameter lines that always show up at the bottom, and they combine different constraints. This combined absolute constraints line, it basically takes everything above that is an absolute constraint. That would be your default constraints like the field of regard and GuideStar availability, plus any special requirements that are added. If I click on it, again, we have that context sensitive help coming up, and it will tell you all of the things that are combined. In this case, those default constraints, and user-specified constraints, such as an after, before, between, etc. For this particular one, obviously we don't have any of those. We just have the phase, but you'll see a little bit different when we look at observation 1. And the other thing that we have down here is this combined absolute role constraints. This only takes into account the field of regard, the guide star availability, and any specified V3PA range that may be on there. Again, doesn't really affect this one, which is why we're seeing it just mimics the field of regard and the guide star availability. Combined absolute constraints does mimic that phase constraint. Okay, so everything looks fine with observation 2. So we're going to just leave it for now. But now we got to look into observation 1 to try to figure out exactly what happened. So I'm just going to look at the first visit here. And you'll see some of these lines very much mimic what you have down here. You've got that meteoroid safe zone again. You've got the field of regard, and you've got guide star availability. Those all look pretty decent. Up here, we've got visibility. Sometimes for moving targets, that's not always the case. But again, I'm just warning you that you will have to work on that. We're not going to touch on that here. We also have those user-specified constraints, which are different from what we saw in observation 2. We've got the V3PA range of 180 to 300, and we've got that between showing up. We also have these relative. These are the links that were added, the implicit ones that APT put on, which group the visits within 53 days, and the other one that requires them to be at the same V3PA. You can see these two are actually both empty all the way across. That's because we don't report on any suitability for the link unless every visit in the link is schedulable. In this case, we don't have any scheduling, and so that's why they're blank. For the combined absolute constraints, it's the same as what we had down here. It's trying to combine everything together, but obviously we have blanks going on here, and so that's why it's not working. We have the combined absolute role constraint, which again is that field of regard, guide star availability, and that V3PA range, and it's showing you where those three come together, and it does have suitability. And then the one we have at the bottom is that combined relative constraints, where it is taking these links into account, which are also blank. And so they're not terribly helpful at this point, but they can show you a little more detail as we start to sort through some of the problems. The biggest issue we see here is in that combined absolute constraints being empty. It means that the absolute constraints themselves are causing problems. And sure enough, we can see that the V3PA range and the between do not overlap. In fact, they have a gap here of about a month or 2 weeks, I guess it is, given this scale. So options are that we can either change the between so that it overlaps with that range, that V3PA orient range, or we can get rid of the V3PA range or change it to something that overlaps with the between. Because this between was put on there for coordination efforts, the idea is, well, let's see what orients or what V3PA ranges might be available during that time frame. I'm looking on the months of May and June to see what might be available. I can use some reports down here to maybe help me see what V3PA ranges might be available for my observations. If I click on reports, it shows you all the visits that are active in the visit planner. You can choose whichever one is appropriate. In this particular case, it's visit 1-1 that I'm going to use, and there's 3 different reports available related to the guide stars, the sun roll, and the total roll. They all serve different purposes. For what I'm going to look at, I want the sun roll analysis. I want to know which V3PAs are available during the time of year, May 1st through June 30th. You have a list over here on the right that gives you all the details right down to 2 decimal places. You could look up the dates you wanted in this list, or if you're looking for a rougher idea or more general idea, you've got it shown here graphically, and you can line up the date on the bottom here, which is May 1st, and follow that line up, and you can see the range that's available on May 1st. It goes as high as maybe a little shy of 175, so maybe as high as 170. Again, for details, you could go over into the list on the right. And by the end of June, we've actually lost suitability. You can see here that we only have it to sort of, maybe the 20th of June, something like that. For exact details, you could, of course, go over here because it's being cut off by the field of regard, which ends on June 10th. So what have we got available here? It looks like it can maybe go as low as, what is that? Maybe down around 120, 115. Say that some of these orients might be a little concerning. we'll maybe try and focus on that orient range of 130 to 150. To confine that, the same way, what we're going to do is update this V3PA back into Form Editor. And I'm going to highlight the observation, go to the Special Requirements section, and I'm going to update this value so that instead of being 180 to 300, it is now 130 to 150. Okay. Making sure that it didn't cause any issues here. It did not. So let's go back to the visit planner. I don't have to run it over on both observations because we know observation 2 is okay. So I'm going to just keep observation 1 highlighted. I also know that I don't need to run it over the entire 17-month time frame that it's defaulting to. I'm just interested in what's going on in May and June. So I'm going to set the processing date range. I'm going to give it maybe a month on either side. And similar to what we have in other parts, you can either use the calendar here to add the date that you want. So I'm picking my start. Well, let's maybe go with April first so we can see a month on either side. And I'm going to end it here at the end of July. And you can see here it gets translated to day of year. If you work in that on your own, then you might know those dates right off the top of your head. Otherwise, you can use those calendars. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This is going to help a little bit for the processing time because it's just going to focus on those 4 months. I'm going to click Update Display, and it's going to update that for observation 1. I will let you know that just because you've only processed over 4 months, that doesn't mean that it will only execute during those 4 months. It is not the same as a between. It's simply a tool that users have to cut down on some of the visit planner runtime while you're maybe tweaking little things here and there. Okay, you can see, as we'd hoped, as expected, we now have a scheduled visit. If we open up all those parameters, you can see that they are all full at the same time. We do see a little, I don't know whether I'd call it a mismatch, but certainly we've got the V3PA range as a subset of the between. So we're losing a little bit of suitability here at the beginning and a little bit of suitability here at the end. The links now are showing lots of suitability. Group visits, you can see it's all the way across. The same V3PA, and of course the combined relative constraints are all looking good. So this program is now schedulable. All right, so, the other thing I did want to caution you about, I have changed the processing dates. It will stay changed to those non-default values until you change them or restart APT. So be very mindful of that. If you're ever in doubt, if you look what happens here when we go to the full observation, which is the full program, and now we're seeing observation 1 and observation 2, you can tell that observation 1 was done over a subset. It's this little hopefully you can see it, this slightly darker line that is just spreading across those 4 months, where this observation 2 is across the entire default range. All right, so let's see where we're at. We're nice and clean. We've got a couple of warnings left. It says 2 errors and warnings. I can also click that here and it'll come up in a pop-up. We still got that warning about the Visit Planner tool has been run, but Smart Accounting has not. And then we have the warning about the not used, unused target that we didn't put in anything. Okay, so I'm not seeing any reason that this couldn't be submitted, except for the fact that we have not run Smart Accounting. You can run Smart Accounting 2 different ways. If you go here in the form editor, you can see there's that little warning that is directing you to where you have an issue and context sensitive help. If you want to take a look at this, you can run Smart Accounting right here. It tells you what it's going to do. It's going to switch to the Visit Planner tool. It's going to change the editor selection to the entire observation so that it does the program all at once. And it's going to run the Smart Accounting tool from there. So you can have APT do it, or you can do each one of those steps on your own. I'm going to have APT do it for now. You may recall, I'm still going on that subset of the full time frame. And so now you see it did the same thing for observation 2, where it has cut it down to just that April 1st through July 31st. It doesn't really affect the Smart Accounting results, but it could be a little surprising for you if you weren't expecting it. So just be aware of that as well. If I go back up here to proposal information, you can see, go to the form editor, you can see that warning has disappeared. And that value that was 7.08 is now 7.11 hours. So a minor change. That's usually just the way that it's incorporating things. It's nothing to be too concerned about. And overall, this program is now looking good. We have the one lingering warning here. To get rid of that warning, I could go ahead and cut that target. And now I have no warnings. It's big green check mark down here. And if I go to the errors and warnings, sure, there's no diagnostics found. This program could be ready to submit. So one more thing that I want to point out, it's not necessarily the order that you have to do this. A lot of people are going to use Aladdin while you're building this. Aladdin has a lot of fantastic tools in it, but it is also very time consuming. So we're just going to kind of do this at a really high level. So for now, I just want to bring it up to you and just show you sort of some of the things that are going on. I'm going to use it to kind of confirm the pointing and confirm the various V3PA values that are on there to make sure that everything looks exactly how I want it to look. Again, you don't have to do this at any particular time frame. I'm just showing it to you now. All right, so you've got some tools in here. I'm not going to really talk about them. As always, you can get help from the JWST help, going to those APT training materials. There are a couple of movies that talk about Aladdin specifically. You've got Aladdin overview, and then you've got using Aladdin in the APT visit planner. You can look at those whenever you have any trouble with it, and there's all sorts of documentation to also reference. When all else fails, you can send an email to the help desk. So what are some of the things that we have going on here? Some of the tools that I am going to show you. I'm going to show you the FOV. I'm going to show you single aperture and some of these coverage circles. Some of these are left over from HST. So that's why you might see some language that's a little unexpected or tools that you'll never actually want to use. HST, of course, uses the phrase orient, and we use V3PA when we're talking about JWST, but it's the same idea. All right. Let's start by taking a look at our M51. The Aladdin viewer over here is going to show you whichever observations are highlighted in the tree editor. If I'm just showing visit 1 or 1.1 or visit 1.3, that's the only one it's showing. You can see it kind of flips around. It's not terribly interesting right now because I haven't loaded the DSS, but I just wanted to show you that that's the sort of thing that you have popping up over there. If I load DSS, that's going to load the star chart. So now we're actually going to be able to see how this lays out on the sky. And you can see there's our 4 pointings, our 4 visits, our 4 tiles. And because I know that I have V3PA, I'm going to highlight this. You can see how it's mostly red with that little green range down here that's centered on the range that I supplied. That's why it says 140. But when we zoom in, which you can do from here, you've got to select, you've got to pan, you've got to zoom. If I click on zoom, it's going to show me a green square. I'm going to center that over my area of interest, and I'm going to click. I'm going to keep clicking until I get to the level I want to be at. So here we are zoomed in a fair bit, and you can see down here is that little green range. If I wait till I have that little horseshoe, and it can be a little, there we go. It'll be a little sticky. I can rotate just this one. Or if I'm really careful, I'm not going to do it right now, you can maybe arrange it so that you are able to find exactly the whole, all 4 of them and rotate those around. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I just wanted to show you that that was there. If I zoom back out a little bit, that is done by, I think it's hitting the left click. Yeah, there it is. And that brings you back out. I can turn on the FOV so that you see all the rest of the fields of view from JWST, or I can go back to just the single aperture that we were focused on. Okay, so M51 looks good. I'm happy with the way that it's oriented. I'm not going to be too worried about it. I'm going to check on the exoplanet next. Now, when I just go to the exoplanet, you'll see everything disappears from here. But that's because now it's trying to show me a completely different area of the sky. I have to reload the DSS. I'm just going to update it, and now we have our observations over here. You'll see that orient ranges is still turned on, and it is green all the way around because we do not have any V3PA. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to show you what it looks like. And there we are. So you can see we've got this is sort of, it just picks 0, 0 when you don't have any kind of range on it. But you might look and be a little worried about this object here. Maybe you don't like that it's on there and you want to see if there's what orient would be available or what V3PA would get that off the chip. We do that, looking for that upside down horseshoe again. I'm just going to roll it away until that target is off. And when I stop, it will tell me what range I'm at or what V3PA I'm at. In this case, it's 346.1. But I'm also seeing this object down here, which maybe I want to keep. I don't want it to roll off. So I think I have to be a little careful how far I roll to make sure it doesn't go off the other end. I'm just clicking and holding and rotating it. And I don't think I want to go any further than about there. And that's at 308.9. Given that I don't want this, but I do want this, I'm going to add a V3PA of 310 to 345. You can do that by going back to our form editor, going to the observation, and I'm going to add that V3PA. And again, we were getting that value from Aladdin, so therefore we know it's in V3PA. I'm going to add 310 to 345, click OK. And now you can see in the Aladdin viewer, it's showing me that range the same way that it did before. This is the green range, that's what's available. I said I don't want it in the red. And to confirm that I'm doing it right, I'm going to do the same thing, make sure I didn't have a typo. I'm going to scooch over all the way to this side. Yep, that's still got the one I want on the chip and the one I don't want is still off. And coming over here, it's still got the one I do want on there. So that means I didn't make a mistake when I was typing it in, and I feel comfortable with this. But now we have that warning back here at the proposal level saying that we haven't run smart accounting. As soon as you make a change, you have to do all those tools over again. You have to run the visit planner on that observation. So I'm going to change the processing date range back to the default. And I'm going to do that by just hitting clear and OK. And that's going to go back to running it over the full 17 months rather than the shorter 4 months that we did in the last run. I'm going to click update display and we're going to see what happens. Now I do know that it is going to confine the windows down because now instead of having all 360 degrees, we're only looking at a 35-degree range. That's something that you have to balance, your science with your flexibility. Make sure you need to have that orient, not that you just want it there. And in this case, it really cut it down. I only have these 2 available windows showing up right here. But I'm also noticing I have a red X that suddenly appeared. Hovering over it, it says the scheduling windows for 1 or more visits of the proposal significantly overlap the micrometeoroid avoidance zone. This is that safe zone that I mentioned earlier that is a preference but not a requirement, in the sense that it does have scheduling windows, but in order for you to use these windows that are outside of the safe zone, you have to have a very, very strong reason. We highly recommend that whenever possible, you try to keep your observations within that safe zone. You need a really strong reason for why we are going to increase the risk to the telescope. So in this case, what's very clearly doing it is that V3PA range. So what I'm going to wonder is maybe I can do that 180-degree flip. That's a very common tactic that people will try to see whether or not turning this to completely the other side is going to give me the suitability that I want. So I'm going to see whether I can have a similar situation where I keep that unwanted object off. Okay, that's where the wanted object comes on. That's around 129, which is to be expected. That's right around that's the 180-degree flip of the lower end. And will it still be okay over here? And yes, that value is the 165. So that does mean that this is another valid orient or valid V3PA range. I'm going to go ahead and add that. you can have multiple V3PA ranges. So if there is a second or even a third and fourth range that will also work, you can add them all. Give us as many PA ranges as will work for your observations. So in this case, I'm going to add, again, V3PA. I'm going to put in that 130 to 165. Click OK. Everything looks okay, although we do have that yellow warning here. It's because I need to rerun Visit Planner since I've made the change. Update display is active. I'm going to click on that, and we'll see whether or not offering that 180-degree flip is going to solve the problem for us. Okay, and it's come back, and it did get rid of the red X, which means this is okay, but it's really just this one small window that it added. So I'm still looking at only having these 3 opportunities, 2 of which are in what we call the avoidance zone, and 1 is in the safe zone, and it's right here at the very end, which means if for some reason we can't use it, we could be looking at a significant delay. I'm not sure that's the way that I want to go. There's one other possibility that we can do that Aladdin allows you, and that's to actually physically move this observation. So I don't want this particular object, but I do want to make sure I keep these 3 in my field of view. There's something here called a coverage circle. I'm going to turn off the orient range just to make it a little cleaner. What you have here is this inner circle, means that anything within that inner circle is always going to be in the field of view. And this outer circle, things that are inside, may be in it at certain ranges, but anything outside it will not be covered. So if I can move my observation to put those 3 desired targets in the inner circle, making sure, of course, that we don't introduce any other unwanted targets, and this unwanted object is now outside of the circle, this position would be something that I could do without an orient range, without any kind of restriction on the V3PA. It is listed over here in the pending changes. I can select them. I can select some. I can select all. If I don't want to use them, I can clear them. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just commit them all. And I'm going to update that target to now use this pointing instead of the previous pointing. And that now means I don't need that V3PA special requirement. I can go back here, happily remove these orient ranges, go back into my visit planner, update display is ready to go. I can click on it. And hopefully we'll get better scheduling now that we don't have any V3PAs attached. And again, those are 2 options. It's up to you what your science can handle, whether it's the shift or whether it's those orient restrictions. In this case, I think this one gives the most flexibility. And if you're okay with it, this is a very solid option. Sure enough, I open it up, and because we don't have that V3PA anymore, we do have all of these opportunities readily available. Again, this is now a program that's almost ready to submit. I've got that one last warning saying that everything's provisional, and I need to run the smart accounting. And I'll show you how you can do that from the visit planner. I highlight the observation folder, and now that Run Smart Accounting button is active. I can just click on it, and it should be pretty quick, and it will come back with the new value, which will hopefully not be too far from the old value. And there's the warning gone. Looking at the proposal information, charge time is 7.11 hours. This is a program that you could absolutely submit. We go into the submission, and again, there would be your submit proposal, include the submission comments. Any warnings, we don't have any, but if you did, you would include that information here, and just make sure that absolutely everything is in place. You have no outstanding red X's, and any yellow warnings are addressed in that submission comment section.